I woke up in a hospital bed thinking I was still 23, a broke college junior pining after the campus ice queen, only to be told I was actually 28. Everyone claimed I had been married for 5 years to a cold-hearted corporate CEO, and the face staring back at me in the mirror looked worn down by years of exhaustion. My phone was packed with hundreds of photos documenting my desperate, one-sided devotion to her, and even her assistant called me Mr. Hayes while warning me to stop showing up at their office to cause scenes. To the rest of the world, I was a psychotic stalker who had slashed his wrists just to blackmail a woman into marriage, acting as her living nightmare for the last 5 years. The car crash had wiped away those 5 years of memories along with my list of sins, leaving me to realize I had forced a woman into a life she hated. "Mr. Hayes, can you hear me?" the nurse asked as she checked my vitals. "Are you awake yet?" The harsh fluorescent lights forced my eyes shut again, while a rhythmic throbbing hammered against my skull like a heavy mallet. I struggled to focus my vision until the blurry shape of a stranger came into view. She was pacing the room, frantically whispering into her phone. "Ms. Reed, it is Liz. Lucas is finally awake," she said into the receiver, asking if she wanted to come by the hospital. A woman's voice, cold and sharp as a razor, cut through the fog on the other end of the line. "If he can talk, tell him to find his own way home, because I do not have time for this," she said before hanging up. The line went dead immediately after those words. The woman sighed and turned toward me, noticing that I was watching her from the bed. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. "Who are you?" I managed to croak out, my own voice sounding raspy and foreign to my ears. She blinked in surprise and explained that her name was Liz and she was Olivia Reed's executive assistant. She told me I had been in a serious car accident and had been unconscious for 3 days. I tried to sift through my mind for any detail of the crash, but I found nothing but a terrifying, empty void. When I asked who Ms. Reed was, Liz's face tightened with sudden suspicion. "Ms. Reed is your wife, Olivia Reed, and you two have been married for 5 years, she replied. I bolted upright so fast that the entire hospital room began to spin. I told her it was impossible because I was only 23, but she spoke to me in a gentle, cautious tone. "Mr. Hayes, you are actually 28 years old, she said, suggesting that I might be suffering from amnesia. I stumbled out of the hospital bed and scrambled into the small bathroom. I gasped when I saw my reflection in the mirror. It was my face, but it was older and harder, with fine lines etched around my eyes. There was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in my gaze that I didn't recognize. It made no sense at all. I was supposed to be a college student, and I couldn't understand how 5 years of my life had simply vanished. Liz followed me into the bathroom and asked if I really had no memory of having a wife. She mentioned that Olivia and I had married 5 years ago, but then she trailed off with a worried look. When I pressed her for more information, she shook her head and forced a smile, telling me she would just take me home. I scrolled through the phone Liz gave me as we drove, and my heart sank with every swipe. There were hundreds of photos of me with the same woman, but the dynamic was unsettling. In every single shot, I was the one leaning in with an adoring gaze while she looked distant, cold, and sometimes even visibly annoyed. I could not believe this woman, Olivia Reed, was actually my wife. Her name echoed through the empty spaces of my mind until a blurry memory finally surfaced. She was the untouchable goddess from business school, the ice queen everyone talked about, and I had spent 2 years worshiping her from afar without ever finding the courage to speak to her. The idea that we were married felt like a fever dream. We pulled into a private estate and stopped before a massive, ultra-modern villa set far back from the road. Liz told me we had arrived at my home as I stepped out of the car. I pushed open the heavy oak front doors to find a cavernous, empty living room where a single woman sat on a white sofa with her back to me. She turned her head as the door clicked shut, revealing a face so perfect it looked artificial. It was definitely Olivia, even more stunning than the girl I remembered, but her expression was as cold as ice. "You are back," she said in a monotone voice, speaking to me as if she were merely acknowledging a delivery. She informed me that she had already paid my medical bills and that I was welcome to stay in the house as long as I didn't interrupt her work. Her movements were fluid and practiced as she stood up from the sofa. I take the master suite and you stay in the guest room, she added before turning away. I called out to her just as she reached the grand staircase, asking her if we were actually married. She turned back to look at me with a flash of mockery and irritation in her eyes. Are you really going to commit to this amnesia routine now? She asked with a sneer. She told me that my little act might work on other people, but it would never work on her. When I insisted that I truly remembered nothing, she just laughed. You were always a great actor, she said, reminding me that I had used every disgusting tactic imaginable to keep her trapped by my side. I stood frozen in the foyer as the sound of her footsteps faded down the upstairs hallway. My mind was a complete wreck as I tried to process why my own wife looked at me with such pure loathing. I could not begin to imagine what kind of nightmare my life had become over the last 5 years. I sat in that cavernous living room until the sun went down and Olivia never showed her face again. The silence in the house was deafening, making the place feel like a beautiful but hollow shell. I eventually started poking around the rooms, desperate to find any evidence of who I was. I found our marriage certificate in a drawer, a cold piece of paper confirming we had tied the knot 5 years ago. Despite that, the house lacked even a hint of warmth or shared life. The master bedroom was locked from the inside, and the guest room I was assigned to was depressing, containing nothing but a basic bed and a small closet. My side of the closet held only a few cheap, worn-out shirts that looked like they had been picked up at a thrift store. When I checked my phone contacts, the situation became even stranger. Aside from Olivia and a handful of work colleagues, I had no friends or family listed at all. I woke up on the sofa the next morning with a stiff neck and a head full of unanswered questions. Olivia was already in the dining room, staring at her tablet with a composed expression while a housekeeper served breakfast. The silence between us was so thick it felt like a physical weight in the room. The butler greeted me politely and placed a plate of food in front of me as I sat down across from my wife. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words felt like they were stuck in my throat. We sat there in a silence, so heavy it was suffocating. Olivia didn't even look up from her screen as she told me she had an important meeting and warned me not to show up at her office. She told me not to act like a lunatic and cause a scene like I usually did. I let out a bitter laugh, wondering what kind of man I had become to earn that kind of warning. Stop playing dumb, Lucas, she said with an icy glare. She reminded me that every time I got jealous of a man named Julian, I would storm into her office and make a public spectacle of myself. The name Julian sparked a faint, unfamiliar memory in the back of my mind, and I asked her who he was. She put down her silverware and stared at me with eyes as cold as steel, identifying him as her business partner. She gave me one final warning to stop harassing him, threatening that I would regret it if I didn't listen. She grabbed her designer bag and stood up, clearly finished with the conversation. I couldn't help but raise my voice, asking her why we didn't just get a divorce if things were truly this miserable. She froze at the door for several seconds, her shoulders tensing before she slowly turned around. Her expression was a confusing mix of fury and something else I couldn't quite identify. She reminded me that I was the one who had practically begged on my knees for her to marry me, and now I was the one asking for a way out. I told her that I truly believed this marriage was a form of torture for both of us. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh and told me she had no interest in participating in my latest psychological game. The front door slammed shut, leaving me alone in the vast, echoing dining room. I forced myself to finish my breakfast before searching the house for some kind of identity. I eventually found my work ID tucked away in a side drawer. I worked as a junior copywriter for a boutique ad agency in Seattle, earning a modest salary of $60,000 a year. In contrast, Olivia was the CEO of a tech startup valued at over $100 million. The massive socioeconomic divide between us made our marriage seem even more illogical. I realized in that moment that I was completely out of her league in every possible way. I couldn't fathom why my past self had been so obsessed with marrying a woman who clearly lived in a different world. That question burned in my mind all the way until I parked my car at the office. The moment I walked into the agency, a young woman with bloodshot eyes rushed toward me in tears. She told me how worried she had been after hearing about my accident. I took an instinctive step back and asked her who she was. She looked completely shocked and told me her name was Leah, asking if I really didn't recognize her. I had no memory of the name, but her intense reaction suggested we were close. I apologized and explained that I was currently suffering from total amnesia. She stared at me in disbelief before fat tears began rolling down her cheeks. I felt completely helpless and tried to comfort her while asking if we had been good friends. She seemed devastated by the fact that I didn't remember her at all. Leah told me we had worked together for 3 years as she wiped her eyes and sniffed. I just shook my head, unable to offer her any comfort from our shared past. She spent the rest of the morning patiently walking me through all my current projects with incredible kindness. As lunch approached, she cautiously asked if I wanted to grab a bite to eat. She suggested going to a local deli we used to frequent, hoping the familiar setting might trigger a memory. I was just about to say yes when my phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number flashed on the screen, and when I answered, a man identified himself as Julian Carter. My heart started racing as I asked him what he wanted from me. He spoke with a lazy yet commanding tone, telling me that we needed to have a conversation over lunch. When I asked what he wanted to discuss, he simply said it was about Olivia. He told me to meet him at our usual spot and hung up before I could argue. I turned to Leah and told her I had to cancel, and although she looked disappointed, she put on a brave face and said we could go another time. I followed the GPS coordinates Julian sent to a high-end steakhouse in downtown Seattle. He was already waiting in a private booth, wearing a smug, faint smile when I walked in. He asked if the rumors about my amnesia were actually true, and I nodded while taking him in. I had to admit the guy had presence. He was handsome and impeccably dressed, radiating the confidence of someone used to being in charge. He and Olivia would have looked like a power couple on the cover of a magazine. He poured me a glass of iced tea and told me he was going to be blunt, stating that Olivia and I were a terrible match. I told him that I already knew that and didn't need him to remind me of our mismatch. His eyebrows shot up when I mentioned that I had already brought up the idea of a divorce to her. Julian was genuinely shocked and laughed, reminding me that I was the man who had once tried to kill himself just to force her into marriage. A cold shiver ran down my spine as he spoke about me, trying to end my life. He explained that 5 years ago, Olivia was supposed to move to New York with him to start a business. When I found out, I apparently slashed my wrist to blackmail her into staying and marrying me instead. He leaned back and recounted the story as if it were a scene from a movie, noting that her parents were so scared of my instability that they forced her to say yes. He told me that the last 5 years had been an absolute nightmare for her because of my actions. I gripped my glass so hard my knuckles turned white. I asked why she hadn't divorced me, yet if all of that was true. Julian sneered and said it was because I never stopped threatening her with fake illnesses and self-harm. He told me I had even harassed her business associates just to keep her trapped in my orbit. I was horrified to learn what kind of monster I had been in the past. Julian leaned in close and told me that if I really had forgotten everything, I should consider it a gift from God. He urged me to finally let her go so that both of us could be free. His words haunted me long after I walked out of that steakhouse. I felt a sickening mixture of shame and disbelief at the thought of the person I used to be. If Julian was telling the truth, I wasn't just a bad husband, I was a pathetic monster who used his own life as a weapon against a woman who didn't love him. I understood now why Olivia treated me with such coldness, and I honestly felt she had every right to be even harsher. Leah came over to my desk when I got back to the office and asked if I was okay because I looked pale. I forced a small smile and told her I was doing just fine. Leah handed me a small silver key and told me it was for my locked desk drawer where I kept my private things. I took the key and opened the drawer to find a yellowed, well-worn notebook. It looked like a personal journal I had kept for years. The first entry was dated March 2019, and the handwriting was definitely mine. It said that I had finally married Olivia, and that even though she didn't love me yet, I had the rest of my life to change her mind. Reading those words made my stomach churn with unease. The further I read into the journal, the more sick I felt. Each entry felt like a nail being driven into my soul as I realized my feelings weren't love at all. It was a dark, growing obsession that had consumed my entire existence. One entry mentioned how much I hated Julian and how I had been kicked out of her office for stalking her. It detailed how I had cut my own arm just to get her to notice me. My hand started shaking as I questioned if I was really the pathetic, terrifying person who wrote those words. Leah's voice snapped me out of my trance as I stared at the journal entries. I asked her in a low, tight voice if she had known about the person I used to be. She asked me what I meant, and I struggled to ask if I had always been that disturbed. She bit her lip and looked at me with a pity that made me feel even worse. She admitted she knew some things, so I told her to be honest and tell me everything. She asked if I was absolutely certain I wanted to hear the ugly truth. I nodded, and she took a deep breath before diving into the history. She told me that when she started 3 years ago, I was already a nervous wreck who spent my days obsessively calling and texting my wife. She said I was constantly tracking her location and would even skip work just to follow her around. She recounted a time I had a hysterical public argument with Olivia because I was convinced she was having an affair, which resulted in the police being called. She also remembered a night when I got drunk and cried on her shoulder, claiming I would rather die than lose my wife. Leah looked at me with genuine heartache as she told me she had tried to warn me our marriage was toxic. I apparently always dismissed her, claiming that my life was meaningless without Olivia. I closed my eyes as a crushing weight of shame settled over me. She tried to soften the blow by saying she always believed I was a good person deep down who just loved the wrong way. I laughed bitterly at the idea of being a good person after everything she had just told me. I asked her how a man who blackmails a woman into marriage with a suicide threat could ever be considered good. She quickly defended me, reminding me that I was always kind to my coworkers and frequently bought lunch for the whole team. She told me that when she fell ill last year and couldn't afford her medical bills, I had secretly paid them for her. The sincerity in her eyes was so intense that I found it difficult to look her in the face. She told me I had simply lost myself in my obsession with Olivia and that I would be much happier if I could just let go. Letting go sounded like a simple enough concept, but it felt like it would be as painful as tearing my own skin off. I didn't go home that night and spend hours wandering aimlessly through the streets of Seattle. A florist smiled at me as I walked past her shop and asked if I was picking up flowers today. I stopped and asked her if I was a regular customer there. She told me I came in every single week like clockwork to buy a bouquet for my wife. She added with a sad little smile that I kept buying them even though I always complained that Olivia just threw them in the trash. It was just another piece of evidence of my pathetic behavior that made me want to crawl into a hole. It was late by the time I finally got back to the house, and I found Olivia still working on her laptop in the living room. She acknowledged my return without even looking up from her work. I took a seat in the armchair across from her and told her that we needed to have a serious talk. When she asked about what, I told her I wanted a divorce. Her fingers froze on the keys as she slowly looked up to study my face. She asked if I was being serious, and I told her I was. I mentioned that I had met with Julian and asked her if everything he told me was the truth. The room went silent for a long time, the only sound being the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. I was the first to speak, offering her a sincere apology from the bottom of my heart. I told her that even though I couldn't remember my past actions, I was deeply sorry for the person I used to be. I promised her that I would cooperate fully with the divorce and make sure the process was as quick and painless as possible. Olivia stared at me with an unreadable expression before finally closing her laptop. She told me she was exhausted and suggested we finish the conversation in the morning. I felt a strange sense of relief as I watched her walk upstairs and disappear around the corner. I knew I couldn't change the terrible things I had done in the past, but I felt like I was finally moving in the right direction. My sleep that night was fitful and filled with haunting, disjointed images of screaming and crying. There was a suffocating sense of obsession in my dreams that felt both alien and disturbingly familiar to me. I began to think that this amnesia was actually a blessing that allowed me to look at my old life from the outside. The next morning, I went straight to the nearest divorce attorney to start the legal process. The lawyer peered over his glasses and explained that an uncontested divorce would be simple if we agreed on everything. When he asked what I wanted in the settlement, I told him I didn't want a single dime. The attorney looked at me in surprise, reminding me that I was entitled to a portion of the assets we had built during the marriage. I shook my head and told him I didn't need anything because I was the one who was truly in debt to her. I left the law firm and drove straight to Olivia's office in the city. The receptionist's professional smile faltered the moment she saw me walk in. She told me Ms. Reed was currently in a meeting, so I told her I was happy to wait in the lobby. She looked incredibly uncomfortable, and I knew exactly why she was so nervous to have me there. I lowered my voice and told her to relax because I wasn't there to cause any problems. I ended up sitting in that cold, minimalist lobby for 2 full hours. The elevator finally opened, and Olivia walked out alongside Julian, both of them sharing a laugh. Her expression immediately soured the moment she spotted me standing there. She walked over and coldly asked me what I was doing at her office. I stood up and handed her a folder containing the separation agreement my lawyer had just drafted. I told her to look it over and let me know if there were any changes she wanted to make. Julian stared at me in total disbelief, as if I were a complete stranger. Olivia took the file and began flipping through the pages with a confused look. As she read through the terms, the frown on her face only deepened. She looked up and asked if I was truly asking for absolutely nothing in the settlement. She asked me what kind of new psychological game I was playing and accused me of acting generous just to make her feel guilty. I looked her in the eyes and calmly told her that I was being completely serious. I admitted that our marriage was a mistake from the very start and that I simply wanted to fix it. I told her that we both deserved a chance at a fresh start in life. She studied my face for a long time as if she were searching for some sign of my old manipulative self. When she didn't find any hidden agenda in my eyes, she finally gave a small nod and agreed. She snapped the folder shut and told me to meet her at City Hall at 9 the following morning. Julian suddenly cut in and asked her if she wanted to think it over one last time. She turned to him with a sharp glare and asked why he was complaining since this was exactly what he wanted. Julian opened his mouth to speak, but then thought better of it and stayed silent. As I walked out of the glass skyscraper, I felt an incredible sense of weight being lifted off my chest. It felt like a massive burden I had been carrying for years had finally been removed. I still felt a deep sense of guilt toward her, but at least I was finally doing something that was for her benefit. When I got back to the house that evening, I found a table set for 2. Olivia spoke to me in a surprisingly soft voice and suggested we have one final dinner together. We ate our meal in a peaceful silence without any of the usual fighting or bitterness. I noticed her hesitating to speak several times throughout the night. After the dishes were cleared, she finally looked at me and asked if I truly had no memory of our past. I confirmed that my memory was a complete blank. She looked out the window at the city lights and told me that we had first met in the college library. Apparently, I had accidentally knocked over my coffee and ruined all of her study notes. I tried to find a memory in my mind, but there was absolutely nothing there. She said I was so nervous that I kept apologizing and insisted on buying her a brand new notebook to make up for it. A small, sad smile tugged at the corners of her mouth as she recalled the moment. She admitted that she had actually noticed me watching her long before the coffee incident occurred. I apologized instinctively, which made her look back at me from the window. She asked me what I was possibly sorry for in that situation. She suggested that if she had been more direct in rejecting me back then, none of this misery would have ever happened. I told her that none of this was her fault. She stood up and told me to get some rest because we had a busy day ahead of us. I couldn't stop tossing and turning that night as her words echoed in my head. I began to wonder if our relationship hadn't been entirely one-sided in the beginning. However, I knew it didn't matter now because the damage was already done. I arrived at City Hall early the next morning and found Olivia already waiting for me. She looked sharp and professional in a black pantsuit, looking like she was preparing for a corporate merger. She greeted me and handed me a document, mentioning that she had made a few small changes. I looked at the paperwork and saw that she had added a $3 million lump sum payment for me. I told her she didn't have to do that, but she insisted I take it. She told me to consider it a severance package in a tone that left no room for argument. I wanted to argue further, but her gaze told me not to waste any more of her time. I reluctantly agreed, and we went inside to finish the cold, bureaucratic process. Half an hour later, we walked out into the blinding sunlight, both of us holding our final divorce decrees. I said goodbye to her as she turned to leave, but then I called out her name one last time. She stopped and looked back at me over her shoulder. I told her that I truly hoped she would find real happiness in her life, and I saw her body tense up at my words. She gave me her first genuine smile since I had woken up in the hospital and wished me the same. My emotions were a complete mess as I watched her walk away from me. I had no memory of our life together, yet the weight of our history continued to haunt me like a ghost. I realized that my past self must have been obsessed with her to the point of insanity. It was a tragic kind of love that had manifested at the wrong time and in all the worst possible ways. After the papers were signed, I moved out of the mansion and into a small one-bedroom apartment near my office. My life became remarkably simple without the constant drama and jealousy of my marriage. I spent my days working and occasionally grabbing a casual dinner with my coworkers. Leah was absolutely floored by how much my personality had changed for the better. She told me that I was like an entirely different person now. I told her that this was probably the version of myself that I was always meant to be. She smiled and admitted that she really liked the new Lucas. About a month later, I was grocery shopping when I unexpectedly bumped into Olivia in one of the aisles. She was pushing a cart full of groceries and looked genuinely surprised to see me. I broke the awkward silence by saying hello and telling her it had been a while. She seemed a bit tense as she asked me how I had been doing lately. I told her I was doing great and asked her how she was. She said she was doing okay, but the air between us felt heavy with all the things we hadn't said. I was just about to walk away when she suddenly called out my name. She mentioned that she had wanted to tell me something at City Hall on the day of our divorce. She bit her lip and decided it didn't matter now since it was all in the past. When I asked her what it was, she just shook her head and told me to take care of myself. Julian showed up at my office one evening and asked if I had time for a coffee. We found a quiet table in the corner of a nearby cafe to talk. I asked him what he wanted, but he kept his eyes on his coffee while he stirred it. He told me that Olivia hadn't been doing well lately and seemed completely distracted. He admitted that he thought the divorce would be a relief for her, but it seemed to have the opposite effect. He finally looked up at me with a concerned expression. He asked me again if I truly had no memory of our past together. I told him once more that my memory was a complete blank. He let out a long, weary sigh and suggested that maybe it was for the best that I didn't remember. He made a cryptic comment about how the failure of our marriage wasn't entirely my fault. When I asked him to explain, he just brushed it off and said he was speaking in general terms. His words stuck with me like a splinter that I couldn't quite pull out. I found another entry in my journal where I wrote about Olivia telling me she might be pregnant. I had apparently been so thrilled that I said some incredibly stupid things to her. I told her that a baby would mean she could never leave me and that Julian would finally be out of the picture. Olivia was livid and told me that if our child was just a pawn in my game, she didn't want it at all. We had a massive fight where I resorted to my old tactics of threatening to kill myself if she had an abortion. She looked at me with cold, dead eyes and told me to go right ahead and do it. My eyes landed on a medical report in her bag that said she was 12 weeks pregnant. I did the math and realized that the timing matched up perfectly with our last few months together. I looked up at her and told her that the baby was mine. She bit her lip and fought back tears as she told me it didn't matter because the baby was hers alone. I reminded her that I was the biological father, so it definitely had something to do with me. She snatched the paper back and reminded me that I was no longer her husband. "Lucas, we are divorced now, and you need to accept that reality," she said with a trembling voice. I tried to argue that the child was innocent in all of this, but she insisted she didn't need my help. I called her name, but she snapped and told me that was enough. Her voice was hoarse as she told me that since I had amnesia, I should just pretend the baby didn't exist. She said I should act as if the child had nothing to do with me and turned to run down the hallway. I watched her go, feeling completely hollowed out inside. She asked me how exactly I planned on being a father to our child. I told her I would pay child support and that I wanted regular visitation rights once the baby was born. I also promised to provide her with anything she needed throughout her pregnancy. She stayed silent as I acknowledged how much my past self had hurt her. I told her that the man I was now truly wanted to make amends for all the damage I had caused. She gave a hollow laugh and asked me how I could possibly compensate her for the past. She studied me for a long time before laying out her conditions for my involvement. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone about the baby. I couldn't interfere in her life, and I had to leave if she ever felt my presence was bad for the child. I agreed to her terms immediately. I became like a satellite orbiting her life, always there, but keeping my distance. I attended every doctor's appointment with her and handled all the grocery shopping and cooking. Whenever she had a late night craving, I was out the door and on my way to her house in minutes. She called me at 2 a.m. one night and told me she was craving strawberries. I got dressed immediately and drove across Seattle until I found a 24-hour grocery store. She took one bite of the berries when I got back and complained that they were far too sour. She looked at the massive pile of fruit on her counter and told me I was doing too much. She reminded me that she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. I told her that pregnancy cravings were unpredictable and that it was better to be overprepared. Julian eventually found out I was taking care of her and confronted me at my apartment. He asked me what my angle was, so I told him I was just fulfilling my responsibilities as a father. He sneered and told me I was naive if I thought this would win her back. I told him I wasn't trying to win anyone back and that I simply didn't want to miss out on my child's life. He looked like he wanted to argue, but eventually stayed silent. As the weeks turned into months, Olivia's baby bump became more and more prominent. Everything changed the day she fainted in her office and was rushed to the hospital. I was by her side when she woke up and told her the doctor said she was suffering from extreme exhaustion. She stubbornly insisted that she knew her own limits. I lost my temper and shouted that she had no idea what she was doing. I asked her if she thought she was made of steel and saw a look of genuine shock on her face. It was the first time I had raised my voice since the accident, so I quickly apologized and tried to calm down. I told her I wasn't trying to yell, but I was just genuinely terrified for her and the baby's safety. She looked down and thanked me in a quiet voice. After that scare, she finally agreed to scale back her hours at the company. She asked me if any of my memories were starting to come back to me. I told her they weren't and asked why she was curious all of a sudden. She mentioned that the way I helped her up the stairs was exactly like the man she used to know. As her due date approached, she announced that she wanted to move back to her mother's house. She told me her mom would be able to look after her there. It was a perfectly logical reason, but I couldn't help but ask where that left me. She hesitated for a moment before telling me that I was welcome to come along if I wanted to. I told her I would love to be there for her. While I was helping her pack, I noticed our final divorce decree sitting in her desk drawer. Mrs. Reed greeted me with a warm smile when we arrived at the house. She told me I looked like I had lost some weight since she last saw me. Olivia quickly reminded her mother that we were no longer married. Her mother gave her a knowing look and reminded her that the baby was still mine regardless of our marital status. Mrs. Reed made a huge feast for dinner that night and asked me about my condition. She wanted to know if I truly had no memory of the past 5 years. Olivia put her fork down and told her mother to drop the subject. Mrs. Reed waved her off and told me that the past was the past. She said that what really mattered was the kind of man I was choosing to be today. I checked into a small hotel near the Reed house during the final week of her pregnancy. I spent every morning walking with Olivia, and we ate lunch together every day. I stayed by her side until she fell asleep each night before heading back to my room. Everything finally kicked into gear in the middle of the night when Olivia's water broke. She was surprisingly calm and told me not to panic as I scrambled to grab the hospital bag. I felt like a nervous wreck as I fumbled with the luggage we had prepared weeks ago. Once we reached the hospital, they rushed Olivia into the delivery room and left me in the waiting room with her mother. Mrs. Reed asked if I was nervous about being a father for the first time. I told her I was terrified as I checked my watch for the 100th time. I realized that even without my memories, the last few months had created a powerful bond between us. I loved Olivia and our unborn child more than I ever thought possible. A nurse finally stepped out of the delivery room with a wide smile on her face. She congratulated us on a healthy baby girl, and my legs felt so weak I nearly collapsed. I asked about Olivia's condition immediately. The nurse assured me that both the mother and the baby were doing perfectly fine. Olivia looked up at me and softly introduced me to our daughter. She was holding a tiny infant wrapped in a soft pink blanket. My hands shook as I reached out to take the baby, and tears started streaming down my face the moment I held her. She asked me why I was crying with a tired but happy smile on her face. I told her I was just overwhelmed with joy as I tried to wipe away my tears. I thanked her for everything, and she looked at me with a gaze that was both tender and filled with emotion. We moved back into Olivia's villa after she was discharged from the hospital. I spent the next few weeks learning how to change diapers, prep bottles, and soothe a crying infant. I spent one night pacing the living room, gently rocking our daughter in my arms. She asked me if I really still had no memory of the past. I confirmed that it was still a total blank. She watched us for a moment and said that she didn't think I would be this kind of man if I hadn't lost my memory. I asked her if she liked this version of me, and she softly replied that she loved it. Olivia tried to correct her mother by saying we weren't a family anymore. Her mother snapped back, asking how we couldn't be a family when we shared a beautiful child. She told Olivia to stop being so difficult and accept the situation. I told Mrs. Reed that I respected Olivia's choices and would never force her into anything. I promised that I would always be a father to my daughter and a constant support for both of them. Olivia's mother nodded, looking truly pleased with my answer. We slowly settled into a comfortable routine where she took the baby during the week and I took over on the weekends. We hadn't officially gotten back together, but we had become a very effective team of co-parents. Leah asked me if I still loved Olivia, and the question caught me off guard. I had no memory of the obsessive love I once felt, but the feelings I had now were hard to describe. I told her honestly that I wasn't quite sure yet. I told her that I was deeply grateful to Olivia and felt a strong urge to protect her and our daughter. Leah gave me a gentle smile and told me that was more than enough. She said that time would eventually reveal the rest of the answers to me. Julian commented that it was obvious we still cared about each other despite our act of being strangers. Olivia's voice turned icy as she warned him to stop talking. He just shrugged it off and said he was making a casual observation. Olivia whispered that I was welcome to stay the night if I wanted to. I told her I would be happy to stay in the guest room. As I lay in bed, I could hear the faint sounds of the baby through the wall, which filled me with a sense of peace. She asked me what I thought would have happened if I had never lost my memory. I told her we would probably still be making each other miserable or would have had a messy divorce long ago. She asked if I regretted losing my past, and I wondered if she meant the memories themselves. I shook my head and told her that I had no regrets at all. I explained that while I wasn't sure how I felt about her in the past, I knew for a fact that I cherished her and our daughter more than anything now. Her eyes shimmered in the moonlight as I spoke. I was taking our daughter to the park one Saturday when I ran into Julian. He asked me if I knew the real reason Olivia hadn't told me about the pregnancy right away. I told him I assumed she just wanted to cut all ties with me. He shook his head and told me that wasn't the entire story. I pressed him for an explanation, but he went silent for a moment. He eventually said it wasn't his place to tell me and that it should come from Olivia herself. I asked her how the car accident had actually happened, which made her stop typing and look up with a defensive expression. She told me it was a very rainy night and that I had been drinking before insisting on driving to see her. She said we had a huge argument about the baby we were expecting at the time. She had told me that if the child was just a tool for me to control her, she didn't want it. That was apparently the moment I snapped and stormed out of the house. A voice on the phone told me to take the child and leave Olivia forever, threatening that the next warning wouldn't be so gentle. The line went dead before I could respond. I looked at Olivia and saw that her face had turned deathly pale in the dim light of the alley. I pulled her into a tight embrace and told her that we were a family and we would face this threat together. I told her there were no more excuses and that I wouldn't let anyone hurt us. She stayed in my arms and cried for what felt like hours. As I held her close, I realized that my amnesia hadn't taken away my ability to love someone truly. I knew in my heart that I would do anything to protect her and our daughter. I was willing to put my life on the line to keep my family safe from whoever was trying to tear us apart. This story isn't about revenge, grand gestures, or dramatic second chances. It's about what happens when you wake up one day and realize that the person you used to be, the one who manipulated, threatened, and suffocated the people you claim to love, is a stranger you don't even recognize. Lucas didn't ask to forget the past 5 years, but that loss of memory became his greatest gift, a chance to see himself clearly for the first time. He stopped chasing, stopped demanding, stopped using his own pain as a weapon. Instead, he learned to show up quietly, to give without expecting anything in return, and to love not as possession, but as presence. The truth is, sometimes the only way to break a toxic cycle is to lose the script entirely. Sometimes healing doesn't come from remembering. It comes from letting go of the version of yourself that was never really you. And the most powerful kind of love isn't the one that begs, threatens, or clings. It's the one that stays, not because it has to, but because it chooses to, day after day, not for reward, but simply because being there matters.